Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
If you're interested in serving on your local Federal Subsistence Regional Advisory Council, the deadline to apply is Friday, February 3rd. Call 1-800-478-1456 for more information.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 24th of January. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, and you can do that easily on the phone at 800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line. Always find us online at weather.gov/Alaska or weather.gov/Anchorage/Juneau or /Fairbanks. That'll localize your information a little bit more. And if you have a question about what you're watching, what you'd like to see more of, or if you've just got a problem with the website or like some help finding the weather information you need, send us an email. You can hit the weather team at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. We're happy to help. Here's a look at what's going on with the hazardous weather across your part of Alaska tonight. In northern parts of southeast around the White Pass area, winter storm warnings in effect right now, and that will continue until 9 o'clock Wednesday morning. They're expecting 12 to 18 inches of snow there. And that said, it's going to be a heavy snow, which could make travel pretty difficult during that time, as well as just losing visibility there with the heavy snow falling in that region. It's something that seems to happen a lot, but if it's happening when you're there, that's a problem. So just be careful. 12 to 18 inches of snow possible in the White Pass area as we go into Wednesday morning. 9 o'clock is when that warning should expire. A little bit lower down the hill and specifically west of the Haines Airport, a winter weather advisory is in effect there. We're expecting snowfall there to reach about 6 to 12 inches of snow, and that too could be a little problematic. You might lose visibility, but again, that heavy wet snow is certainly going to come down, and as we get into the early morning hours tomorrow, that should start to taper off through about 9 o'clock or so on Wednesday. So winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings for northern parts of southeast tonight. The orange color you see across the western part of Prince William Sound is really a smaller color on the map there. We've got a big map and a big area to talk about that fills in when we have watches, warnings, and advisories, but really this is just for the Portage Valley and the Turnagain Pass area here. This is a high wind watch, and if you're thinking, wow, let's see, it's wintertime, winds, that's probably going to make it warm up. You'd be right. You could be a junior meteorologist for the day. That southeasterly wind is expected to pick up as we get into Wednesday afternoon, and then by Wednesday night, winds of 40 to 55 miles per hour are expected with gusts to 65 to 75 miles per hour. Of course, that also means there could be some damage in the area or perhaps rattle the power lines a little bit. So we're watching for those conditions to set up, and if we're a little more sure of how this is going to set up by early tomorrow and into the midday, that will become a high wind warning or maybe just a wind advisory if it's not as much of a strong situation or a signal that that's going to happen. But right now, Portage Valley and the Turnagain Arm and Turnagain Pass area, Turnagain Arm region, let me say that right, Portage Valley and Turnagain Arm is expected to have some strong and gusty winds, southeasterlies again, anywhere from 40 to 55 miles per hour, gusts 65 to 75. That'll start tomorrow afternoon and evening and into Thursday morning for the highest wind threat. Let's go a little bit further out to the west, and we have a winter weather advisory for the Bering Strait region there. That region is also expected to see some poor visibility. Looking at northerly winds around 50 miles per hour, not expecting to see any more additional snowfall, but with the wind chill being a factor at 45 below and the visibility dropping to about a half mile or less, your travel conditions will be a little tricky at times. So a winter weather advisory for St. Lawrence Island and parts of the Bering Strait coastline, that'll go until 6 o'clock tomorrow night or Wednesday night. So be careful if you're moving around Gamble and Savunga and any of the camps there, as well as the western end of the Seward Peninsula. So wind and cold and more wind and cold and then some snow. Well, it still sounds like Alaska to me. Speaking of the warm-up on the way, there's a sizable area of warm air that's moving across the central and eastern Gulf tonight, and it's moving up the southeastern coast as we go through the daytime tomorrow. As this wind moves over south central Alaska, you're going to notice the change there. It's going to supply rainfall to parts of southeast, but it's going to supply enough warm air to parts of south central that it could create some windy conditions around the Turnagain Arm area, as well as put rain in on top of snow as we get into Thursday in some cases. Not a great situation, especially for everyone that's just so happy that winter has finally returned in the form of snow across parts of south central. This warmth is also going to push its way into the interior. And if you're tracking the temperatures that we saw last week to about this week, many areas, including the Middle Tanana Valley, folks at Fairbanks and North Pole out toward Delta, you're looking at temperature swings that could be on the order of 50, 60, 70 degrees from where you were to where you're going. I mean, it's going to be a pretty sizable difference. For South Central specifically, we're really talking about temperatures warming above freezing. You're going to have to think about some slick roads, high winds again around the Turnagain Arm, and especially through some of those favored gaps. And then as this all winds down over South Central, rain showers falling on snowy roads is a possibility. So if you have travel plans, starting Wednesday night really, but especially on Thursday and into Friday, you're going to want to keep abreast of the weather. Make sure you've got maybe an alternative plan. And if you're in school, you're a teacher, or perhaps one of the school districts in the region, you want to keep an eye on what's going on with the weather so you can make some good decisions ahead of time too. Feel free to give us a call. Here's a look at the weather picture as it relates to the satellite's eye down on Alaska. And you can see that strong southerly flow working its way up across the northern and eastern Gulf. Again, a lot of warm air right here that right now it's moving from west to east. But as soon as this low pressure system moves northward just a little bit, this is going to start moving in from the south and southeast, pushing warmer air in towards south central. Right now out west, if you look around St. Lawrence Island, you can see we've got clouds moving north and northeast, but underneath that, the surface winds are coming in from the north, drawing into low pressure. And again, those winds out of the north at 50 miles per hour could be driving visibility down to about a half mile or so. Not expecting new snow, but those wind chills will be brutal at 45 below. Looking up north, you can see clouds also lifting northward. The overall weather pattern is now moving from south to north instead of what we were talking about last week when we seemed to have more of a northerly influence across most of the state. That is shifting that entire weather pattern from really cold, perhaps even the coldest in the northern hemisphere, to kind of sneaking back into a milder type of weather pattern. You can see that southerly flow working its way up across Prince William Sound and the Kodiak Island region. Out west, just on the edge of your screen here, are two waves of low pressure. That will combine eventually with what we have in the Gulf to kind of reinvigorate the pattern and give us more of a southerly flow across most of the mainland as we go forward through the rest of the week. Right now, low pressure sitting south of Kodiak Island, and another wave out here across the eastern Bering Sea between the Pribilofs and west of Bristol Bay, and there's those other two systems sitting just south of the Aleutians. Warmer air is sitting just offshore of southeast Alaska. Had some pockets of rain there today and over the Cook Inlet region. And out across the west, still cold enough for snow around parts of Kotzebue Sound, the Bering Strait, as well as the Pribilofs, and out across the northern part of the YK Delta. As we get through tonight, snow showers will continue out in the west, including parts of Norton Sound and the YK Delta. No advisories or warnings with that, just the cold and the poor visibility there around St. Lawrence Island. Low pressure is sitting south of Dutch Harbor in Alaska with an occluded front trying to work its way northward. We've got a break in the clouds, and then there's that southerly wind kicking in, giving us enough warmth and wet air for rainfall across a large part of southeast, but we're expecting that snow to continue west of the Haines Airport and again for the Klondike Highway region around White Pass. Snow is possible across some parts of south central tonight, but as we get a little bit further into the forecast there, you'll notice that starts to break up a little bit more as the winds start to kick in. Any snow that's falling in the region, especially around Anchorage and the western part of the Kenai Peninsula, is probably going to start to dry up a little bit more because those winds are coming over the mountains and drying up as they descend in elevation, and that is a key factor in that warming process. That's what starts generating that warm air on the lee side of the mountains as that wind is coming over. Low pressure sitting across the western Gulf here. We're tightening up the gradient. The winds will start to pick up. Showers continue for southeast. High elevation snow showers continue there. Most of the interior will be looking at more clouds than anything else right now for your Wednesday. And notice that frontal boundary, the mark between that warmer air and the colder air up north is kind of sneaking its way northward a little bit more. Out across Kotzebue Sound, snow showers there, low pressures west of Nunivak Island at 977 millibars. And notice these black lines once again, those are isobars, lines of constant pressure, and the tighter they get, the faster the wind's got to flow. And in this case, we're kind of scrunching them all together right here across the Bering Strait. That means that wind is going to be pouring through the Bering Strait, probably more of a north wind, and that wind chill around places like Savunga and Gamble, it's going to stay up there, so plan on being cold at least through Wednesday and into Thursday. Look at that, tightens up even more as we get into Thursday. Low pressures south of Nunivak Island, 972 millibars there. We've got another cluster of waves here across Bristol Bay and just west of Kodiak Island. There will be periods of rain mixing with snow across southwest. Right now it looks to be a little bit more into Dillingham and King Salmon than anywhere else. Probably still snow in Bethel as we're forecasting right now. But that's not a mistake. Around South Central and the Kenai Peninsula to Kodiak Island and into Prince William Sound, that's a forecast for rain as we get into Thursday, so plan on some changes as we go there. And then for Southeast, expect periods of rainfall there. Southerly winds will be picking up, and there will be some breezy conditions shaping up for Southeast, especially in some of the more gap-prone areas. The windy spots, and you know where they are, those places will start to see some stronger winds as we get into Thursday. Down to the south, that looks like a reinvigorating blast of warm and wet air there. 974 millibar low across southern parts of the Gulf. We'll be lifting northward, and with that we expect to see a continued flow of that warm, wet air across more north and eastern coastal locations as we get into Friday as well. And all this warm air has to go somewhere. It's not just going to stop at the Alaska Range. It is going up and over, and the clouds will continue to build across the interior with a frontal boundary lingering across the Brooks Range. On the west side of that, still enough cold and wet air to produce snow showers through Nunivak Island, St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait, and most of the Chukchi Seacoast. Watch for areas of fog and flurries elsewhere across the North Slope. Let's check our temperatures. 30s and 40s today for many in southeast around Prince William Sound, 30 in Valdez, 40 in Cordova, 28 around Kenai. And we saw temps in the 30s around the Matanuska and Susitna Valley. It was about 34 in Healy, 11 below in Fairbanks, and again, warmer air is coming your way, and 11 below in Fort Yukon. Anywhere from 15 to about 35 below for the North Slope. Prudhoe Bay and Kaktovik were cold today for sure. Single digits around Kivalina. It was 0 in Shishmaref, 7 in Nome, and Galena saw temperatures in the low to mid-teens today. Grayling, Russian Mission, single digits to low 20s. Bethel was 17. And Lake Iliamna was back in the lower to mid-30s today by the 4 o'clock hour. Bristol Bay temperatures were just above freezing in some places, upper 30s for many around Kodiak Island. Looks like St. Paul was 37. Dutch Harbor and Unalaska just above freezing at 34. And let's see, Shemya, 26 degrees there by the late 4 o'clock hour. In the Middle Tanana Valley tonight, look for temps between about 5 below and 10 below in some locations. A little bit further east up in Eagle, it shouldn't be quite that cold. Anywhere from 15 to 30 below across the North Slope once again. In Kotzebue Sound, 5 to 10 below, 4 above in Nome, 10 above in Unalakleet. Bristol Bay temperatures just a hair below freezing tonight at 31, 27 in Sandpoint, 29 in Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, and mid-20s for the Aleutian Chain, 21 around St. Paul and St. George. And southeast, upper 30s and lower 40s tonight with South Central in the 20s. Look for high temperatures tomorrow. Back in the lower 40s for parts of southeast, South Central in the 30s, and warming up as we go into Thursday again. Teens to 20s for many in the central interior, 23 around Eagle. And notice north of Fort Yukon, we're still stuck in the cold, anywhere from 5 above to 5 below. The North Slope also talking about temperatures anywhere from 10 to 20 below. Kotzebue Sound, teens there for you around the southwest, 20s and 30s, and the Aleutians as well as the Alaska Peninsula back in the 30s, 40 in Kodiak tomorrow. On to flying weather, pockets of IFR across the northern Gulf, MVFR for southeast to start tomorrow, IFR for Kodiak Island and southwestern coastlines, and the northern parts of the Seward Peninsula. The Chukchi Coast expected to see IFR all the way through the Bering Strait and St. Lawrence Island, pockets of southwest, and hit and miss along the Alaska Peninsula, the northern coast, and you'll notice IFR is going to increase across some of the higher terrain as we get into southeast tomorrow afternoon. Let's take a look at your pass conditions. Areas northward still looking at VFR while it will be very cold, expecting the visual flight rule there. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see IFR conditions continuing throughout the day. Again, that is expected to pretty much linger throughout the afternoon. Same goes for Rainy Pass there. Windy Pass expected to lean over toward IFR conditions. Isabel Pass, we expect to see IFR developing and staying there. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see visual flight rule through most of the day. Tenita Pass, MBFR conditions should continue. Portage Pass, IFR will be the rule throughout the day, and Chilkoot and White Pass, obviously with snow and many of that heavy snow throughout a good chunk of the day, expecting to see IFR. Freezing levels now. That warm air will continue to build across the eastern Gulf with a series of low pressures down to the south and moving northward, so watch for these numbers to come up in the rest of the week. The surface freezing line right now still hugging the northern and western Gulf and then just dropping south of Adak and Atka, but there is just a little hint of some warmer air sitting just outside of Bristol Bay right now. And we zipped right on past the icing, so I will tell you what I just saw there. Areas across the northern and eastern Gulf will have an increased chance for some light to isolated moderate as we get into the daytime tomorrow, and that will only start to pick up and move north and northeast. Most of those areas, I believe, are about 2,000 to 3,000 feet. There's some pockets out across the west as well that are sitting at about 1,000 to 2,000 feet and above. So I'll watch out for some light isolated out across the west. Now here's the jet stream. We had a very pronounced trough of low pressure across the western Pacific. That speed there at around 150 to 190 knots. Running into a wall, though, that's trying to slow it down. This high pressure ridge across the west coast is allowing that southerly flow then to push right up across the Gulf, and that's where our warming's coming from. Previously, we were under that northwesterly flow that has moved eastward, and now we are under the influence of this developing southerly flow, and this looks to stick around for at least a little while into next week. 9,000 feet southerlies here, about 20 to 40 knots across the open waters of the Gulf, including areas over southeastern Alaska, a little bit faster down to the south. Across the western part of the coastline, still looking at south and southeasterlies here. Winds pick up a little bit more, wrapping around low pressure for the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern chain at 45 knots. And also over the Bering Strait, where winds come back around over the western Bering at 20 to 30 knots. For the North Slope, 9,000 feet, south and southwesterly flow for places like Barrow and Prudhoe Bay, 15 to 20 there, and southerlies for most of the mainland. At 3,000 feet, a very similar pattern. Not a whole lot changes here. 20 to 40 over the Gulf out of the south, 15 to 20 across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Still looking at southerlies up the west coast and most of the Alaska Peninsula, with northerlies over the chain anywhere from 20 to 30 knots. As far as turbulence goes, watch for increased risk of turbulence across south central and some of the gap-prone areas around the Prince William Sound region below 4,000 feet. And across southeastern Alaska tomorrow below 4,000 to about 6,000 feet in the north. Through the Bering Strait region with those strong northerlies, especially at low levels below 3,000 feet, watch for occasional to widespread moderate. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with the rest of your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Zero code take over runway 32, clear for takeoff, Falcon 3021, wind call.
Winter Lake Lodge is on Finger Lake, northwest of Anchorage, about 50 minutes by bush plane. Everything at the lodge that you see has been flown in by airplane, and ordering produce and getting produce out in 20 below conditions from a 50-minute flight onto an ice-covered lake has its challenges. And we're also a checkpoint for the Iditarod dog sled race in the wintertime.
In the winter, it's a lot of preparations, especially for the Iditarod. We love the Iditarod because it's sort of a cross-state community event. At our location, it begins when the Iditarod Air Force pilots start dropping off supplies. We first receive straw, bales of straw, which we then move from our airstrip over to the checkpoint area by snow machine. After that, we sort of make a great big doggy parking lot out here. And we do that with groomers, go along the Iditarod Trail and see if there's, trees that have fallen down, any bridges that need to be made over washouts, or make sure creek ice is safe. We drill holes into the ice so that there's water for the mushers to add to the dog food. When the dogs check in, most of them spend the night here, or certainly rest here, and they'll feed their dogs. Over the Iditarod, the lodge is packed. It's full of
our full service guests, and at the same time we also feed the 70 mushers and 10 to 15 checkers and vets, and lots of people that just come in off of the trail. I think even from the fine dining meals that we feed our guests to the food that we feed the mushers, I think everybody's kind of surprised at what they get.
Mandy will kind of spearhead that and help you guys out. She tries to have everything prepped. I think our guests notice that we are a pretty close family. I think they envy that in some ways. You know, some people say, oh, that's pretty cool having your kids working with you in the business. Lots of people do that, of course, come up in the business, and it's a little bit different. You know, everybody that works here really has to have the responsibility for a lot of things. We have no prima donna chefs, no prima donna guides, no prima donna owners. So if the dog lot needs to be cleaned up, we do it. Somebody needs to meet the airplane, we do it. We unload it, we haul the recyclables, the garbage, get it out, greet the guests, haul bags, pump fuel, whatever needs to be done.
I think, you know, people really get to see my family for who we are. You know, we don't act differently or anything. Our family really work well together to bring an incredible experience to anybody staying here at the lodge. But we also all bring something different to the table. You know, my sister with her wellness and yoga and massage, and me with baking and pastry and kind of pushing the limits to what we can do. You know, my dad is just still a kid and incredibly excited to go out and go to mountaintops every day. And my mom has had the incredible culinary career of working with some of the best chefs in the world, and has had the opportunity to befriend Julia Child and work with Jack Papan.
It's a difficult business, and it does take commitment, and you really have to be passionate about being out of town and the hardships that happen once in a while. But the rewards are great, and people are more and more seeking out a more personal interaction with their activities, their vacations, their adventures. We hope our visitors leave Winter Lake with either continued or new appreciation for Alaska. We get people who have saved their pennies for their whole lives to come experience Alaska, and they're just in awe of the lifestyle, and so we really like that.
I think just because my family's been doing this business for so long, it really doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like we're serving others. It feels just like a day-to-day living. We're pretty simple people, and we don't have extravagant things. So I think when we want to treat ourselves or relax, we kind of just sit back and enjoy the view.
It's always a good time to sit back and enjoy the view, at least for a few moments, right? Here's a look at the sea ice edge now, and our sea ice analysts have said that the ice edge is growing slowly to the west and southwest now, out of Bristol Bay and south and west of Nunivak Island, and almost to St. Matthew Island, but not quite. The problem it's running into is increasing southerly winds that are chewing up that leading edge of ice. So new ice, new advancing, but it's maybe a little bit slower than it was yesterday. Here's a look at southeast, and you'll notice those south and easterly winds are present here as well. 20 to 30 knots across the central and southern inner waters, southerlies across the Lynn Canal, 15 knots with the 3-foot sea, and 16-foot seas along the outer coast. South and southeasterly wind about 20 to 25. For Thursday, those winds are coming up outside of Cross Sound and into Icy Cape and Cape Fairweather. 40 knots, 21-foot seas there, and that's about the rule as you head down the outer coast. On the inside, 25 knots in the Lynn Canal, still out of the south, but those southeasterly winds pick up even more, 30 to 40 knots. And as you get into Clarence Strait, a 40-knot wind with higher gusts is possible there, with 6 to 10-foot seas along the ocean entrances by Thursday in southeast. For south central, Prince William Sound's looking at easterlies at 25 knots with a 6-foot sea, 13 to 15-foot seas across the north and western Gulf at 30 knots. Northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet, 15 to 25. Once the ice edge drops off south of Calgan Island, 25 knots with a 7-foot sea, 10-foot seas west of the Barrens, and easterlies inside of Shelikof Strait. Those become southerlies we get into Thursday. And look at that southeast flow moving into Prince William Sound in the northern Gulf. 40 to 50 knots here, looking at 18 to 22-foot seas on the outside, 10-foot seas on the inside of Prince William Sound. That's going to be opposed by a northeasterly wind coming down northern parts of Cook Inlet at 30 knots. West of the Barrens, a southeasterly wind at 30 knots with an 11-foot sea, and southerlies 35 knots with an 18-foot sea east of Kodiak Island. For Bristol Bay, at easterly flow at 20 knots, southeasterlies on northern Pacific 20 knots with an 11 to 13-foot sea, and northeasterlies down the Bering Sea coast at 15 knots. That'll turn westerlies as we get into Thursday with a 13-foot sea. Southerlies from Castle Cape to Chignik with a 17-foot sea, and easterlies continue inside of Bristol Bay at 15 knots there as we look at Thursday. Across the Aleutians, 25 knots will be the rule for the wind speed, but you'll see a little bit more of a northerly flow in the west and northwesterlies as you get into the central and eastern chain. 8 to 10-foot seas across the Bering Sea coast, 12 to 14-foot seas across the Pacific, and 14-foot seas there for Kiska and Attu as well. For Thursday, a northwesterly flow for the Bering Sea coast will keep westerlies going across the Pacific all around 30 to 35 knots. The exception will be from Kiska to Attu at 25 knots with a northwesterly flow, 10-foot seas there. Otherwise, 14 to 16-foot seas for the Bering Sea coast and 13 to 16-foot seas for the Pacific on Thursday. For the west coast, northerlies over St. Lawrence Island, northeasterlies over the ice north of Nunivak Island, easterlies off the Kuskokwim Delta, but we'll keep north and northwesterly winds moving into the Pribilofs and over St. Matthew Island. 25 to about 30 knots there with a 9 to 11-foot sea. As we get into Thursday, look for offshore winds from the north and east, 15 to 30 there, northerlies across St. Matthew Island, and northwesterlies 35 to 40 knots or so around St. Paul and St. George, and 15-foot seas are expected there. That'll be on Thursday. Now for Wednesday, across the North Slope, 10 to 15 knots for most areas of the Beaufort Seacoast, all the way down to about Point Lay. Then the winds pick up there from Cape Lisburne into the Kotzebue Sound region at 30 knots from the north and northeast. Wind speeds and direction really doesn't change much on Thursday. Look for status quo as you go from Wednesday into Thursday for the North Slope, looking at your marine areas there. Now, recapping tonight's weather. Winter storm warning for the White Pass area, looking for 12 to 18 inches of snow again by tomorrow, and a winter weather advisory for areas west of the Haines Airport for about 6 to 12 inches of snow through tomorrow morning. A high wind watch has been posted for the Turnagain Arm area and the Portage Valley region, looking for those winds to come up as we get into tomorrow afternoon and into Thursday, and a winter weather advisory is in effect now for the Bering Strait coast and St. Lawrence Island. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
If you're interested in serving on your local Federal Subsistence Regional Advisory Council, the deadline to apply is Friday, February 3rd. Email subsistence@fws.gov for more information.